Have you ever wondered what happens to heroes after the glory of victory fades? Picture a young soldier who survived the fiercest battles of World War II, only to face an unexpected fate when peace finally arrived. His name was Lieutenant Henry Jones, Jr., a familiar figure to fans of Band of Brothers. But behind his bright smile and fearless courage lies a story shrouded in mystery, waiting to be uncovered. What really happened to him? And why has his tale remained hidden for so long? Join us today on History Unraveled, where every secret finds its light, as we take you through the journey of Henry Jones, Jr., from his heroic deeds on the battlefield to the untold mysteries after the war. This is the forgotten story of a soldier who never made it home. Like so many of his generation, Hank dreamed of a better world, a world where the American dream could flourish. These secrets are just the beginning, and they'll unfold as you step into the story ahead. Henry Sweet Jones, Jr. was born into a legacy of bravery. On April 27, 1924, in Buffalo, New York, he entered a family where courage wasn't just admired, it was expected. His father, Henry Sweet Jones, Sr., was a living legend. A World War I pilot with the Lafayette Escadrille, Jones Sr. flew alongside American volunteers in the French Air Force, earning medals like the Croix de Guerre and Legion of Honor for daring missions. Stories of his dogfights, including a rumored clash with the infamous Red Baron, became family lore. For Hank, as he was affectionately called, these weren't just bedtime tales. They were a call to greatness. Growing up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and later Dunkirk, New York, Hank was surrounded by reminders of his father's heroism. The family home was a living museum. Medals gleamed in glass cases, black and white photos of biplanes lined the walls, and a tattered flight jacket hung proudly in the study. Hank would sit by the fireplace, eyes wide, as his father recounted the thrill of flight and the terror of enemy fire. "It's not about the glory," his father said. "It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." Those words stuck with Hank for life. But being the son of a war hero carried a quiet weight. Hank felt the need to follow in his father's footsteps, to prove he too could be a hero. At 16, itching for adventure, he tried to join the French Foreign Legion, a reckless move quickly stopped by his family. Instead, they guided him toward a disciplined path, the United States Military Academy at West Point. In 1941, as the world plunged deeper into war, Hank entered West Point, determined to carve his own mark. West Point was a crucible. The grueling training pushed Hank to his limits, but he excelled. He shone in military history and tactics, and his leadership potential caught the eye of Colonel William H. Wilbur, a World War I veteran who saw in Hank the same fire that burned in his father. Hank's thesis on airborne warfare, boldly predicting that paratroopers would revolutionize the battlefield, earned praise and fueled his dream of joining the elite airborne forces. On June 6, 1944, as the Allies stormed Normandy, Hank graduated from West Point, ranking 97 out of 460 cadets. Among his classmates was John Eisenhower, son of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, a testament to the caliber of his peers. But for Hank, the real test lay ahead. He'd been forged for war. Now it was time to face it. After West Point, Hank volunteered for airborne training at Fort Benning, Georgia. The course was brutal, 5 jumps from a C-47, each one a test of nerve and will. But for Hank, the freefall was exhilarating. He earned his wings in December 1944 and joined the 13th Airborne Division. Fate, however, had other plans. In January 1945, with the 13th overstaffed, Hank and 15 classmates were sent to Europe as reinforcements for the battle-weary 18th Airborne Corps. His destination, Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. Easy Company was already legendary, having fought at Normandy and endured the brutal winter at Bastogne. When Hank arrived in Haguenau, France in February 1945, he was a green lieutenant stepping into a unit of hardened veterans. The men eyed him warily, another 90-day wonder from West Point, untested in combat. Captain Dick Winters, Easy Company's revered commander, assigned Hank to lead the 2nd Platoon. Winters saw potential in the young officer, but knew respect had to be earned. Hank's early days were humbling. The soldiers were polite, but distant, trusting only those who'd bled beside them. Undeterred, Hank listened, learned, and slowly won them over. His chance to prove himself came on February 13, 1945. Captain Lewis Nixon, the regiment's intelligence officer, needed German prisoners for interrogation. Winters tapped Easy Company for the mission, a night patrol across the Moder River to raid a suspected enemy outpost. Hank volunteered to lead one of the 2 assault teams. Winters hesitated. Hank was untested, but regulations required an officer, so he agreed. The plan was simple but dangerous. 2 teams would cross the river in rubber boats. Sergeant Ken Mercier's team would hit the outpost, while Hank's scouted the town. On patrol night, tension hung thick. As they paddled across the icy river, one boat capsized, forcing a few men back. Hank, unflinched, ordered his team onward. On the far shore, the teams split. Hank's group crept through dark streets, every shadow a potential threat. Meanwhile, Mercier's team stormed the outpost, capturing 2 German prisoners, but losing Private Eugene Jackson to friendly fire, a tragedy that haunted the company. Hank's team, finding no prisoners, linked up with Mercier's and retreated across the river. Back at base, the mission was deemed a success, but Jackson's death left a scar. For Hank, the patrol was a baptism by fire. He hadn't captured prisoners himself, but he'd led his men through danger and brought them home safe. The veteran's skepticism began to fade. Less than a week later, Hank was promoted to 1st lieutenant and moved to regimental headquarters. Some grumbled about his quick rise, chalking it up to West Point privilege. But those who'd fought with him knew better. He'd earned it. As the Allies pushed into Germany, Hank continued to serve with distinction. He was wounded but refused evacuation, earning a Purple Heart and 3 Bronze Service Stars. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, the war in Europe was over. For many, it was time to go home. But for Hank, the army was home. He chose to stay, knowing that freedom isn't free, driven by a duty that still burned within him. Assigned to the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment in Frankfurt, Hank took command of a company. The mission now was maintaining discipline among restless troops, overseeing demobilization, and helping rebuild a shattered city. Frankfurt, once a thriving metropolis, lay in ruins from Allied bombs. Hank's unit distributed food, curbed looting, and laid groundwork for Germany's recovery. It was a different kind of challenge, less about combat, more about compassion. Hank excelled, his firm but fair leadership earning respect from soldiers and locals alike. He organized a baseball game between American GIs and German kids, a small gesture that meant the world in a city starving for hope. In August 1946, Hank's career took a turn. He transferred to the 970th Counterintelligence Corps, CIC detachment in Berlin, a city teetering on the edge of the Cold War. The CIC's job was rooting out Nazi remnants and countering espionage, a murky world of informants, double agents, and moral gray zones. As a field office commander, Hank led investigations, interrogated suspects, and navigated a treacherous political landscape. One standout case was dismantling a neo-Nazi cell led by a former SS officer. Through meticulous detective work, Hank's team crushed the plot, thwarting a potential threat. But the job took its toll. Constant danger, ethical dilemmas, and war memories weighed on him. In letters home, he confessed feeling like a stranger in my own skin, haunted by what he'd seen. Yet Hank found solace in Berlin's cultural life. He attended concerts, visited museums, and mastered German. He forged deep bonds with his team, finding camaraderie in shared hardship. Still, the ghosts of war lingered. Nightmares of fallen comrades and the cries of the dying plagued his sleep. Early in 1947, during a routine mission in Heidelberg, Hank's Jeep skidded off an icy road and rolled down an embankment. Thrown from the vehicle, he suffered severe injuries. Rushed to the 279th General Hospital in Berlin, he underwent emergency surgery. Doctors were hopeful, but complications set in. On July 21, 1947, Henry Sweet Jones Jr. died at age 23. His death stunned his family and comrades. How could a man who'd survived war's fury be lost so suddenly in peace? It was a stark reminder that the cost of conflict lingers long after the guns fall silent, that our heroes often pay the highest price in the quietest moments. Hank's body was returned to the U.S. and buried at Arlington National Cemetery, his grave a silent testament to a life of service. That summer of 1947 marked the end of a journey that began in Buffalo and stretched across battlefields and broken cities. Picture the scene. A flag-draped casket touching down on American soil. A somber procession through Arlington's sea of white headstones, each one whispering a story of sacrifice. For years his name faded into the background, overshadowed by the larger-than-life tales of generals and decisive battles. But to those who knew him, Hank was no mere footnote. He was a living symbol of the countless soldiers whose grit and guts shaped the world we know today. Imagine what that homecoming meant to the people who loved him. His mother, Helen Susan Jones, who'd cheered his first steps and prayed through his deployments, now stood clutching a folded flag, her tears falling on the soil of a nation her son helped save. His father, Henry Sr., the fearless flyer who'd dodged bullets over France, must have stared at that grave with a storm of emotions, pride in the man Hank became, and a father's grief for the future they'd never share. Letters poured in from Easy Company vets, guys who'd once sized him up as a rookie but came to see him as a brother. One wrote, "Hank showed up when it counted, and he left us better than he found us." That's not the kind of thing you read in history books, but it's the kind that sticks with you, the quiet legacy of a kid who gave everything he had. As a storyteller digging into Hank's life, I can't shake the question, what would he say if he could see us now? Standing here, surrounded by the weight of his story, I imagine him looking back with that easy grin of his. He might tell us about the adrenaline of his first jump, the bone-chilling cold of that Motor River night, or the laughter of those German kids swinging bats in Frankfurt. He'd probably chuckle about his teenage Foreign Legion stunt, only to shrug and say his family knew best. But I bet he'd get real quiet talking about the buddies he lost, guys like Eugene Jackson, whose faces never left him. Hank wasn't the type to chase medals or headlines. He was the guy who'd share his last cigarette or stand tall when the bullets flew, the kind of American spirit that built this country from the ground up. Let's widen the lens a bit and hear from someone who's spent years studying men like Hank. Dr. Emily Carter, a historian specializing in World War II's unsung heroes, shared a take that cuts right to the core. Hank Jones wasn't a name you'd find on a monument, she told me. But he was the heartbeat of the greatest generation. He showed up, day in and day out, through the chaos and the quiet, doing the work that held it all together. She pointed to his time in Berlin, chasing down neo-Nazi cells in those tense post-war years. It wasn't glamorous, no parades, no newsreels, but it was crucial, a lifeline for a peace that could have slipped away. That's the stuff history skips over, the grind that kept the world turning while the big shots took the bows. His life, though brief, teaches us about courage and integrity. From a boy inspired by his father's heroism to a leader who earned the respect of grizzled veterans, Hank embodied the best of his generation. His choice to stay in Europe after the war, serving when he could have gone home, spoke to an unshakable sense of duty. As we honor Hank's memory, let's remember that the freedoms we enjoy today, the backyard barbecues, the quiet elections, the everyday peace, were secured by the bravery of men like him, who answered the call when their country needed them most. Every time we salute the flag or cheer on the 4th of July, we're tipping our hats to guys like Hank, who didn't just fight for 1945, but for every year that followed. But Hank's story isn't just about the battles. It's the human side that gets you right in the chest. I stumbled across a letter he wrote to his sister just weeks before that Jeep flipped. No talk of war or heroics, just a homesick kid missing his mom's apple pie and the way the wind howled off Lake Erie. "I'll be home soon," he scribbled, "and we'll sit by the water like old times." That letter never got an answer, not because she didn't care, but because a twist of fate snatched him away first. It's those small, fragile moments that hit hardest, proof that behind the uniform was a young man with plans, a family waiting, a life snuffed out before it could take root. And what about the guys he left behind? Lieutenant Jack Foley, one of Hank's Easy Company brothers, put it in words that still echo. Hank had this light in him, Foley recalled years later. You saw it in how he moved, even when the chips were down. Losing him after the war felt like we'd been cheated out of something big, something we didn't even know we'd miss. That's the kicker with Hank's tale. It's not just what he did, but what he might have done, the unwritten pages stolen by a patch of ice on a German road. But Hank's story also shines a light on war's hidden toll. The physical and emotional scars didn't vanish with peace treaties. They followed him, as they did so many others, into peacetime. His death, from a mundane accident, underscores life's fragility and fate's unpredictability. Dr. Carter put it bluntly, "We love to tell the victory stories, the D-days, the VE days, but for every ticker-tape parade, there were soldiers like Hank, carrying the war in their souls long after the crowds went home." Those nightmares of fallen friends, the strain of those Berlin nights, they were as real a part of his service as any battlefield, a price paid in silence. Today, as you walk the white rows of Arlington or visit memorials worldwide, pause to think of the personal stories behind each name. Hank's journey, from West Point to Europe's battlefields, from triumph to tragedy, reminds us that history isn't just dates and battles. It's people. People who loved, dreamed, and sacrificed. Next time you're at a war memorial, run your fingers over those carved names. Each one's a life, a family, a ripple that still touches us. Hank didn't win the war single-handedly, but he showed up, he kept going, he gave us a piece of the freedom we live every day. As General George S. Patton once said, "It is foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived." Hank lived with purpose, and though his time was short, his impact endures. That headstone at Arlington isn't just a marker. It's a call to us, to live with a fraction of the guts he showed every day. Here's to Hank Jones, not just a soldier, but a son, a friend, a dreamer who gave more than he ever got back. Lieutenant Henry S. Jones, Jr. never made it home, but his story deserves to be told. Through this video, we honor not just Hank, but the thousands whose sacrifices have faded into history's current. As we close, hold this truth close. Every soldier has a story, and every story matters. Thanks for joining us on History Unraveled, where we revive the past, one untold tale at a time. If Hank's journey moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more stories from history's shadows. Together, let's keep the flame of remembrance burning bright.